everyone, and welcome back to Miss Key's Classroom. My name is Rachel, and in today's video I am going to be talking you through the different types of teaching positions that you might be offered once you enter the teaching profession. I had a request for this video on my Instagram, and I thought that it was a good time to talk about it because a lot of people might be looking for new jobs in the new year. And so today I'm going to be talking you through the sort of pros and cons of relief teaching, contracts, and then also permanent positions as well. So thank you so much for joining me for this video today, and let's get straight into it. Okay, so let's start off with temporary relief teaching, also known as being a TRT or a relief teacher. This kind of position means that you don't have a job at any particular school. You might work at multiple schools, and essentially you get called up the day of or the day before a teacher needs cover. And so you would then go in and cover their lessons for half a day or the whole day, depending on the school that you are working at and the class that you're covering. So let's start off with the pros of being a relief teacher. I think the most well-known pro is that it is really good pay. It will depend on what school you're in, what state you're working in, but generally the pay for relief teachers is pretty good, so that's obviously a very big pro. Another pro is that it gives you a lot of flexibility with when and where you work. So you can always, if you get a call up to say, hey, we'd like you for tomorrow, if you've got something on already, you can always say no. Obviously, if you say no lots, schools aren't going to keep calling you, but it does give you a bit of job flexibility. So being a relief teacher is a really great option if you are maybe only looking to work for a short amount of time. Maybe you want to do a lot of travel while you work as well. So relief teaching can be really good at that because you can choose your hours to some extent, and you can choose the days you work to some extent as well. Another pro of relief teaching is that you don't necessarily have the responsibility of having your very own class. And so relief teaching can be a really popular choice for graduates who've just finished uni and are maybe still trying to find their feet a little bit in the teaching profession and just want to gain some more experience before having their own classroom. And so choosing to do relief teaching can help them to gather resources, to sort of practice new things, to see what other teachers are doing. And so relief teaching can be a very good option because you don't have the responsibility or maybe the pressure of having your own class. So if you are just starting out, it might be a good option for you if you don't feel quite ready to have your own class yet, but you still want to start teaching. And then the last pro of being a relief teacher is that it does help you to get your foot in the door at various different schools. The next kind of position I'm going to talk about is contracts, and sometimes they can be really hard to come by, and sometimes schools will only hire teachers that they already know. And so being a relief teacher at a school can just help you to start building that relationship and really get your foot in the door there. So they're all the pros of being a relief teacher. Now let's move on to the cons. So I guess the biggest con of being a relief teacher is that you don't have that job security. You don't have the set hours, and you don't necessarily always know that you're going to get work each day. And so it's not necessarily a guaranteed form of income. So that would be something to consider if you are looking at being a relief teacher, how important it is that you have consistent hours each week. Another big con of being a relief teacher is that unfortunately you don't get holiday pay, and you also don't get sick pay either. And so that can be another thing to consider if you are looking at doing relief work. And then I guess on the flip side of the pro of not having the responsibility of having your own class, the con is that you don't necessarily get to build up really solid relationships with one group of students. Obviously, if you're doing relief work consistently at a school, you'd get to know lots of students, but it's not necessarily quite the same as being their classroom teacher. So that's another thing to consider as well. Overall, I think relief teaching is a really good option if you are maybe just starting out as a teacher and really wanting to find your feet a little bit before you have your own class. It's also really good if you're looking for those flexible hours. Maybe you have another job that you really want to focus on, and then you just want to do a couple of days a week of relief teaching. It can be a really good option for you. So that's sort of relief teaching, the basics and the positives and negatives of it. Let's move on to the next kind of teaching role, which is contract teaching. So generally, once you finish uni, if you don't do relief teaching, you would generally do contract teaching. And this is where you have a set fraction of time working at a school for a set period of time. So for example, you might be full-time for a term, and then at the end of that term, your contract ends, and then you might no longer have work at that school and you might pick up a contract somewhere else. But contracts can range anywhere from 4 weeks in length to a whole year. And these sort of, depending on the length, that also changes the kind of holiday pay you get as well. So I'll go through that in a minute. But contracts are generally what a lot of graduate teachers start out on. And then unfortunately, some people will be on contract for a number of years. I know people who are on contract for 7 years. Other people might get really lucky and they only be on contract for 6 months or a year before they get permanency. I'll talk about permanency in a minute as well. So contracts, I guess the pros of them is that it is a really good way to get your foot in the door, even more so at a school than relief teaching. So yes, relief teaching helps you to start building up that relationship, but having a contract there as well and having your own class or classes does really help you to get your foot in the door there and might lead to further contracts or maybe even a permanent position later on. So that's probably the biggest pro of a contract. And because you get to work at that school for that set length of time, it also helps you work out whether it's a good fit for you, because that's important as well. Yes, we all want to have a job and we like having job security and all of that, but it's important to make sure that a school is a good fit for you, and not every single school is going to work for everybody. And so having a contract can be a really good way to work out if that school is somewhere that you want to work long term, or maybe if you're just content with having that, term contract and then you want to see what else is out there and move on to a different school. So essentially with contracts, you are only locked in for that period of time that your contract is for. So that can be a real positive, especially if you are going away as well. If you want to travel too, maybe you just have a contract for a term and then you go on holidays or whatever it is. Another big pro of contracts versus TRT is that you do get your sick leave pay, and then depending on your contract, it's a little bit confusing, you will likely get some holiday pay as well. I'll talk about that in the pros in a minute. But there is that job security with contracts for that set amount of time, and because of that, that means you get your sick pay as well. So yeah, they're probably the pros to contract teaching. Like I said, lots of people start out on contract if they don't start out on TRT, and it's a really good way to get your foot in the door at a school, sort of find your feet a little bit as a teacher, and experience what it's like to really be a classroom teacher. All right, so let's move on to the cons of contract teaching. I mentioned it before with holiday pay, but only some contracts will attract holiday pay. So the way it works is if your contract is only a term long, you will only get paid for that term. However, if it is a semester long, you'll get paid in the holidays that are between term 1 and term 2, or term 3 or term 4, whatever semester it is. So some contracts will attract holiday pay. Again, if you're working for a whole year, you will get paid for all of the holidays, including the Christmas holidays. But that is something to consider if you're maybe tossing up between a couple of contracts. Maybe one is, 0.5 fraction of time, so you're only working half the amount that a full-time teacher would, but maybe that's for a full year, as opposed to a 0.8 contract that's for a semester. So it might be a good thing to weigh up, okay, well for this one, I'd get holiday pay the whole year, and then maybe I could do relief days at the school as well to build me up to more full-time work. Whereas the other one, I've obviously got more set hours, but it's only for a semester. So tossing up those sort of things and just keeping them in mind, I think is really good, and it's good to be informed about that, because the worst thing that I know has happened to some of my friends is when they've had a contract and they haven't realized that they won't get that pay during the holidays, and then you're stuck for 2 weeks without pay, or for some people 6 weeks without pay if it's in the big school holidays. So that is unfortunately a con of some contracts, depending on how long they are. Another downside to contract teaching is that it might not always be the fraction of time that you are after. So you might really want to work at a school full time, but they might only be able to offer you a 0.8 contract. So you're only working 0.8 amount of time that a full-time teacher would work, if that makes sense. And so it can be a little bit tricky if you are really gunning for a certain fraction of time, because schools can't always offer the amount that you want. It all depends on how many permanent teachers they have, who's on leave, who's coming back from leave. It's all very confusing, and I certainly don't envy the people that have to do all the timetabling and all the contracts and stuff like that. But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes contracts won't necessarily be the exact fraction of time that you do want. But in my experience, a lot of schools are quite good at topping you up with relief work if you do request that. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And then the final downside to contract teaching is that while you do have job security for the amount of time that your contract is for, after that contract ends, you don't have job security anymore, and you need to find another contract or do relief teaching in order to still have work. So contracts can be a really tricky thing because you could be the most incredible teacher that the school has ever seen, but if they don't have a contract position for you, it can be very hard for the school to try and keep you, because like I said before, schools are always changing around. There's people going on leave, coming back from leave, there's permanent teachers, there's teachers getting placed, all of those sorts of things all throw up a lot of, complexities for the people who are doing the timetabling and the staffing. And unfortunately, at the end of the day, the contract teachers, they might not get a position after that contract has ended if there isn't a spot for them, even if they are incredible and amazing. And so that's something to bear in mind as well with contracts. And it can feel really disheartening when you love a school and you know you've done a really good job, but there just isn't a spot for you. But I guess always bear in mind that there will always be contracts around, always be jobs around, and that, you know, just because you've loved one school doesn't mean you're going to not love another school even more. And so that is unfortunately a downside of contracts, is that you only have job security for the amount of time that your contract is for, and then after that it's sort of a bit of a waiting game to see who will offer you contracts. But it's just something to bear in mind when you are contract teaching, because it can be a little bit of a fickle thing with, you know, at the end of your contract getting re-signed onto another contract. So there's sort of the pros and cons of contract teaching. Like I said, a lot of graduate teachers start out on contracts if they don't start out on relief teaching. My first contract was, I think it was only 5 weeks, and it was the school that I did my placement at. And I found it amazing because I'd sort of just graduated. I think I was only 0.6 or something like that. I think I only had 3 classes. And I found that a really, really good way for me to sort of find my feet as a teacher. And then in the next year, I transitioned to a full-time contract at the same school. Overall, I think that being on contract, especially when you're starting out, is a really great way to experience having your own classroom, experience different schools, and really find your feet as a teacher. Okay, and then the last type of teaching role is a permanent teaching role. Rather than going through the pros and cons of this, I'm just going to sort of talk about what it actually means to be permanent a little bit, and then it will sort of become clear that there are a lot of positives to this and not necessarily a lot of downsides to being a permanent teacher. But what permanency means is that you have a permanent teaching role at a school indefinitely until you choose to either take on a leadership role or take on a role at another school. So permanency is sort of what a lot of teachers are aiming for eventually. Like I said, some people are on contract for many, many years before they achieve a permanent role. It can be very difficult particularly in the public sector to get permanency because it all depends on how many permanent teachers are already at a school. It depends on how many people have leadership roles. It's all very confusing, but definitely getting permanency is something that a lot of teachers are sort of working towards, because it is that ultimate job security. It means that you have a job at that school for as long as you want until you choose to move elsewhere. When you get offered permanency as well, your fraction of time is considered in that as well. So for example, at my school, I am permanent full-time. Other people might be permanent 0.8 or 0.6, whatever it is. And so your fraction of time is considered within that as well. And that can change during your time at the school as well. You might negotiate to drop down to 0.8. Maybe, you know, if you've come back from maternity leave or you've come back from leave of some sort, and you might drop down. And so that is I guess a positive of being permanent at a school as well, is that there is a little bit more flexibility with the fraction of time that you work too. It all gets a little bit confusing if you start thinking about leadership roles and all that. So I'm not going to touch on that too much, because a lot of that I don't even understand about. If you know, you take a leadership role at a different school, you have right of return and things like that to your school. All of that confuses me greatly. But essentially at the end of the day, permanency means that you have a permanent role at that particular school. So as you can probably tell by now, the biggest positive aspect of permanent teaching is that you have job security. You know where you're going to be teaching each year, you know how much you're going to be teaching. And so that can be a really amazing thing to have. And you know that you're going to have consistent income during the holidays, you're going to have sick pay and all of those sorts of things that contract teaching and relief teaching don't always entail. So that's why a lot of people want to be permanent. And then, like with contracts, obviously with permanency, you can move around a little bit. I sort of touched on leadership roles as well. That's sort of one way to get a taste of other schools as well, because you might win a leadership role at a different school. But with permanent teaching, there's a lot less movement than there is with contract teaching, because generally once people get permanency at a school, they're like, right, I'm here, I'm going to stay here for quite a while. And you know, that's fair enough. Permanency is not necessarily an easy thing to come by, and it is quite a big process to transition to permanency, and you have to apply for the role and things like that. So, you know, unless it was to move from one permanent role in one school to another permanent role in another school, a lot of teachers sort of don't move around too much once they've got permanency, unless it is to take a leadership role. This is obviously just me speaking from my experience. Other people might have different opinions on that, but generally from what I've seen, once you've got permanency, people like staying in those roles for quite a while, because, you know, you fought for permanency for a long time, and you want to stay in that role, and you obviously really love that school if you've accepted a permanent position there. So permanency is ultimately what a lot of teachers are working towards, but again, it might not be for everyone. You know, if you really want to travel the world, permanency is not going to be the option for you. Doing short-term contracts or TRT work would be a lot more beneficial, because it would allow you to have that flexibility with your time. Whereas if you are someone that really values job security, then a contract or eventually transitioning to permanency is something that you'd probably be working towards. Okay, so I think I have covered everything. Hopefully I've answered some of the questions you might have. Overall, I think what's really important is that you work out what things in the teaching role you value. So whether it's flexibility with your time or job security or a certain amount of pay, maybe it's a certain fraction of time you want to be working. Working out those things is really useful when you are looking for teaching roles, because you can sort of work out what's going to be right for you, and, you know, accept roles that are going to let you to do the things you do want to do. There's no right or wrong answer, and everyone is going to be different when they're looking for teaching roles. You've got to go with what's right for you and go with your gut. So hopefully this video has been useful. If you do have any other questions, please let me know in the comments below and I will get back to you. But for now, all the best if you are out there looking for teaching roles for 2024. It can be a little bit of a daunting process, but just know that what is meant to come your way won't pass you by, and you are definitely going to end up exactly where you need to be. For now, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you all very soon in my next video. Bye!